The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of courtroom 302 in the Miami-Dade County Courthouse. Judge Michael Stevens adjusted his black robe and settled into his large leather chair, just like he had done every weekday for the past 8 years. At 45 years old, he had earned a reputation as a fair and serious judge who ran his courtroom with quiet confidence. As he picked up the day's case files, his clerk Jennifer walked in with a fresh cup of coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, just the way he liked it. "Good morning, Your Honor," she said, placing the cup on his desk. "Today's looking pretty standard. We got 12 cases, mostly small-time stuff." Michael nodded, taking a sip of his coffee while scanning through the papers. The familiar routine of his morning was about to change in a way he never expected. The first few cases went by quickly: a traffic violation, a property dispute, and 2 shoplifting cases. As the clock struck 10:30 a.m., the bailiff's voice rang out. "Next case, State of Florida versus Sarah Thompson." Michael looked up from his papers, expecting to see just another defendant. But the moment the woman walked in, his hand froze midway through turning a page. Something about her seemed familiar. She wore a plain blue shirt and black pants, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked tired and nervous, like many defendants did, but there was something else. The woman raised her head, and their eyes met. In that instant, Michael felt like he was transported back in time. The courthouse disappeared, and he was standing in the dusty playground of Liberty City Elementary School, watching a young girl with bright eyes and 2 long braids crushing everyone at basketball during recess. "Sarah?" The name slipped out before he could stop himself. The courtroom fell silent. This wasn't normal procedure, and everyone knew it. Sarah's eyes widened with recognition. "Mikey?" she whispered, using a nickname he hadn't heard in over 30 years. The attorneys exchanged confused looks. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Jennifer, who had worked with Judge Stevens for 6 years, had never seen him break his professional demeanor like this. Michael quickly composed himself, but his mind was racing. This was Sarah Thompson, the same Sarah who had helped him pass Ms. Wilson's tough math tests in 5th grade. The same Sarah who had shared her lunch with him when his family couldn't afford the school meals. The same Sarah who had dreams of becoming a doctor and had won the science fair 3 years in a row. Looking down at the charge sheet in front of him, the words seemed to blur together. Drug possession, petty theft. Sarah Thompson, age 44. The details felt wrong, like they belonged to someone else's life story. The defense attorney, a young woman in a navy suit, stepped forward. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to the charges." Michael's legal training kicked in. He knew the proper procedure. He should recuse himself immediately. Judges couldn't preside over cases involving people they knew personally. It was a clear conflict of interest. But as he opened his mouth to make the declaration, he hesitated. The Sarah he knew would never have ended up here without a good reason. Something had gone terribly wrong in her life, and now she was standing in his courtroom, looking nothing like the confident, bright-eyed girl from his childhood. "Counsel, approach the bench," he said firmly, using his judge voice to mask the turmoil in his mind. As the attorneys walked forward, Michael could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on him. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, but the familiar comfort of his daily routine had been completely shattered. He glanced one more time at Sarah, who stood quietly at the defendant's table. In that moment, he knew this case would be different from any other he had presided over. This wasn't just about following legal procedures. It was about understanding how a star student from Liberty City had ended up on the wrong side of his courtroom, and what role he might play in making things right. As Judge Michael Stevens sat in his chambers during the court's morning recess, memories of Liberty City flooded his mind. He loosened his black tie and closed his eyes, letting himself travel back to the summer of 1985, when he and Sarah were just 12 years old. The Liberty City housing projects weren't an easy place to grow up. Most buildings had broken elevators, and the playground equipment was always rusty. But for young Michael and Sarah, it was a world full of possibilities. Every day after school, they would meet at the community center basketball court. Sarah was always easy to spot with her red hairbands and the worn-out Chicago Bulls t-shirt she refused to throw away. She wasn't just good at basketball. She was the best player in the whole neighborhood. Even the older kids couldn't beat her when she was determined to win. "Come on, Mikey, you're too slow," Sarah would shout, dribbling past him with her quick moves. She never made fun of him for being worse at sports. Instead, she spent hours teaching him how to shoot properly and defend better. But their friendship went beyond the basketball court. Sarah was the smartest kid in their grade at Liberty City Elementary. While other kids rushed home after school, she and Michael would stay in Ms. Wilson's classroom for their homework club. Sarah had a special way of explaining math problems that made everything seem easy. "See, Mikey," she would say, drawing pictures to help him understand fractions. "If you think about pizza slices, it all makes sense." One memory stood out clearly in Michael's mind. It was during their 6th grade science fair. Sarah had worked for weeks on her project about plant growth in different types of soil. She had saved up her lunch money to buy special seeds and had kept detailed notes in a blue notebook she carried everywhere. The night before the science fair, a pipe burst in her apartment, destroying her project. Michael remembered finding her crying behind the school building, but Sarah didn't give up. She stayed up all night redoing her experiment with seeds from her mother's kitchen and dirt from the community garden. She won first place the next day. That was the Sarah he knew, determined, brilliant, and unstoppable. She was the girl who helped younger kids with their homework, who organized food drives during holidays, and who never missed a day of school even when she had to walk in the rain because they couldn't afford bus fare. Michael remembered the last time he saw her back then. His father had finally found a better job in a different part of Miami, and they were moving away from Liberty City. Sarah had given him her favorite book, The Secret Garden, with a note that read, "Dreams can grow anywhere, just like gardens. Don't forget that, Mikey." Looking at his reflection in the office window, Judge Stevens saw both who he was now and the skinny kid he used to be. He had made it out of Liberty City, gone to college on a scholarship, finished law school, and become a judge. He had achieved his dreams, just like Sarah had always said they would. But what had happened to her dreams? The Sarah Thompson standing in his courtroom today looked so different from the confident girl who could solve any problem. Her eyes, once bright with determination, now seemed dim with worry. Her shoulders, once held high with pride, were now bent as if carrying a heavy weight. Michael pulled out his phone and looked at an old photo he kept there, a yellowed picture from their 6th grade graduation. There they stood, both grinning widely, Sarah holding her Academic Achievement Award and Michael with his perfect attendance certificate. They had been so sure about their futures then. A knock on his chamber door brought him back to the present. "Your Honor," his clerk Jennifer called out. "They're ready to continue the session." Judge Stevens straightened his tie and stood up. He had to decide what to do about Sarah's case. The law was clear about judges not presiding over cases involving people they knew. But as he thought about that determined 12-year-old girl who never gave up, he knew this wasn't just another case to be processed through the system. Something had changed Sarah's path, and maybe understanding what happened was the key to true justice in this situation. Judge Stevens returned to his courtroom, the weight of his robe feeling heavier than usual. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room as Sarah Thompson stood before him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The bright orange jumpsuit she wore seemed to drain the color from her face. The prosecutor, Mr. Rodriguez, stood up with his case file. "Your Honor, the charges against Ms. Thompson are clear. On the evening of March 15th, security cameras at Wilson's Pharmacy caught the defendant stealing prescription medications worth $238.50. When approached by security, they also found food items hidden in her bag." Michael noticed how Sarah's shoulders tensed at these words. Her public defender, Ms. Martinez, placed a gentle hand on her arm. The Sarah he knew would never steal. She was the girl who returned extra change when the cafeteria lady made a mistake. Furthermore, Mr. Rodriguez continued, during the arrest, officers found 3 unprescribed pain pills in her pocket. "This isn't just about theft, Your Honor. We're also dealing with illegal possession of controlled substances." The courtroom was quiet except for the soft whirring of the ceiling fan. From his elevated position at the bench, Michael could see every detail of Sarah's changed appearance. Her once neat braids were replaced by gray-streaked hair pulled back in a simple bun. Deep lines marked her face, telling stories of hardship he knew nothing about. But her eyes, they still held that same spark of intelligence he remembered, even if it was now dimmed by fear and exhaustion. Ms. Martinez rose to speak. "Your Honor, if I may present some context for my client's actions." She pulled out several documents. "Miss Thompson has no prior criminal record. She's worked as a home health aide for the past 15 years, caring for elderly patients until she lost her job 3 months ago due to budget cuts. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the floor as her lawyer continued. She's been raising her teenage daughter alone while caring for her younger brother, who has severe diabetes. The medications she took were insulin and basic antibiotics. The food items were bread, peanut butter, and canned soup. The facts hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He remembered Sarah's mother, Ms. Rose, who used to make extra sandwiches for neighborhood kids who didn't have lunch. Now Sarah herself couldn't afford food for her family. A small commotion at the back of the courtroom caught everyone's attention. A teenage girl who looked just like young Sarah had slipped in, wearing a school uniform and clutching a backpack. She must be Sarah's daughter. Behind her was a thin man in a wheelchair, Sarah's brother James, who Michael remembered as an energetic 5-year-old always trying to keep up with the bigger kids. Sarah noticed them too, and for the first time, her composure cracked. A single tear rolled down her cheek, which she quickly wiped away. She stood straighter, as if trying to be strong for them. Judge Stevens looked down at the charges before him. The law was clear about the consequences of theft and drug possession, but he also knew about the holes in the system, how losing a job could start a domino effect that destroyed lives, how medical bills could drain savings, how desperation could drive good people to make bad choices. He thought about his own diabetes medication, sitting safely in his medicine cabinet at home, covered by his excellent insurance. He thought about his full refrigerator and his comfortable salary. The gap between his life and Sarah's seemed like a canyon, even though they'd started from the same place in Liberty City. Your Honor, Mr. Rodriguez spoke again. Given the clear evidence, the state recommends 6 months jail time and a fine of $2,000. Sarah's daughter let out a small gasp. In the wheelchair, James gripped the armrest so hard his knuckles turned white. Judge Stevens realized he was at a crossroads. The safe choice would be to recuse himself, to let another judge handle this case. That's what the law suggested. But as he looked at Sarah, at her family, and thought about everything he knew about her character, he understood that sometimes justice required more than just following standard procedure. He made his decision. Counsel, approach the bench, he said, his voice firm with purpose. The next few minutes would change not only Sarah's life, but also challenge everything he knew about justice and mercy. The judge's chambers felt crowded with both attorneys standing before his desk. Judge Stevens had removed his black robe, making this discussion feel less formal. Mr. Rodriguez, the prosecutor, stood with his arms crossed, while Ms. Martinez, the public defender, kept glancing at her watch, worried about her next case. I know this is unusual, Judge Stevens began, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil, but I need to tell you both something before we continue. He took a deep breath. I grew up with Sarah Thompson in Liberty City. We were close friends throughout elementary school. Mr. Rodriguez's eyebrows shot up. Your Honor, in that case, you must recuse yourself. The law is very clear about. Let me finish, please, Michael interrupted, holding up his hand. Yes, I'm aware of the standard procedure, but I'm also aware of something else. I know Sarah's character, I know her background, and I believe this knowledge might help us serve justice better than simply processing another case. The prosecutor shook his head. This is highly irregular. If the media finds out. The media already has. Ms. Martinez cut in, holding up her phone. Someone in the courtroom must have recognized what was happening. It's already on Twitter, and a local news van just pulled up outside. Michael walked to his window. Sure enough, a Channel 7 news van was parked in front of the courthouse. A reporter in a blue blazer was setting up her microphone. Instead of feeling worried, Judge Stevens felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe this publicity was exactly what was needed. He turned back to the attorneys. Here's what I propose, he said, sitting down behind his desk. We handle this case with complete transparency. Yes, I knew Sarah Thompson 30 years ago. Yes, this is unusual. But instead of passing the case to another judge who would only see the charges on paper, we have an opportunity to look deeper into the circumstances that brought her here. Ms. Martinez leaned forward, interested. What exactly are you suggesting, Your Honor? I want to create a special rehabilitation program, Michael explained. Not just for Sarah, but for other first-time offenders in similar situations. Instead of jail time, we focus on addressing the root causes that led to these crimes. The prosecutor still looked skeptical. Your Honor, while that sounds admirable, we have protocols. Protocols that aren't working. Judge Stevens interrupted firmly. Look at our overcrowded jails. Look at the repeat offender rates. Maybe it's time to try something different. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Jennifer, his clerk, poked her head in. Your Honor, the press is requesting a statement. And there's something else. The Liberty City Community Center director is here. She says she wants to help. Michael smiled. The same community center where he and Sarah used to play basketball was reaching out. It felt like a sign. Mr. Rodriguez, he turned to the prosecutor, if we do this by the book, with full transparency and proper oversight, would you be willing to work with us? We could create something meaningful here, a program that could help many people beyond this one case. The prosecutor was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded slowly. Under two conditions. First, everything must be documented and reviewed by the Ethics Committee. Second, Miss Thompson must agree to regular drug testing and counseling. Agreed? Ms. Martinez said quickly. My client will accept those terms. Judge Stevens stood up, feeling the weight of the moment. Then let's go back in there and make history. But first, I want to meet with Sarah privately, with both of you present, of course. She needs to understand exactly what we're proposing. As they prepared to leave his chambers, Michael caught his reflection in the window. He saw not just the judge he had become, but also the boy from Liberty City who understood how a few lucky breaks could make the difference between sitting on the bench and standing before it. The afternoon sun was setting behind the Miami skyline, casting an orange glow through the windows. In a few minutes, they would return to the courtroom, where reporters, spectators, and Sarah's family waited to hear what would happen next. But right now, in this moment, Judge Michael Stevens knew he was doing the right thing, even if it wasn't the easy thing. Sometimes, he realized, true justice required more than just following the rules. It required the courage to create new ones. The small conference room next to Judge Stevens' chambers felt like a confessional. Sarah Thompson sat at the table, her hands folded in her lap, while her lawyer, Ms. Martinez, sat supportively beside her. Judge Stevens had removed his robe, hoping to make the setting less intimidating. Sarah, Michael began gently, I need to understand how you got here. Not just the events of that night at the pharmacy, but everything that led up to it. The full story. Sarah's eyes met his for the first time since their initial recognition in the courtroom. Her voice was soft but clear. After you moved away, things were okay for a while. I kept my grades up, got a scholarship to the University of Miami. I was going to be a doctor, just like I always said. She paused, twisting a tissue in her hands. Then Mom got sick. Breast cancer. She didn't have good insurance, and the bills started piling up. I was in my second year of college when she got really bad. Michael remembered Ms. Rose, how she used to make sure all the neighborhood kids had something to eat, even when her own cupboards were nearly empty. The memory made Sarah's next words even harder to hear. I dropped out, she continued. Someone had to take care of her and James. He was only 15 then, and his diabetes was getting worse. The doctors said he needed special care, expensive medications. I took a job as a home health aide. The pay wasn't great, but it let me take care of both of them. Mr. Rodriguez, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up. What happened to your mother? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She passed away 6 months after I left school, but the medical bills didn't die with her. I was 20 years old with a mountain of debt, a sick brother to care for, and no degree. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Outside, they could hear the distant sounds of traffic and the news crews that had gathered. I met James's father a year later, Sarah continued. He seemed kind at first. We got married, had my daughter Jasmine. But he changed, started drinking, getting violent. When he hit Jasmine, I took the kids and left. Haven't seen him since. Judge Stevens noticed how Sarah's hands trembled slightly, but her voice stayed strong. 15 years of hardship hadn't completely broken her spirit. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. Things were tight, but we managed. James's condition got worse. He lost feeling in his legs last year. I was doing okay until the care facility where I worked closed down 3 months ago. No warning, no severance pay. She looked directly at Michael. I tried everything, Mikey. Food banks, churches, aid organizations. But James's insulin costs $1,000 a month. His wheelchair broke, and insurance wouldn't cover a new one for another year. Jasmine needed school supplies. Her voice finally cracked. That night at the pharmacy, I had exactly $2 in my account. James was out of insulin. He'd been rationing it, taking half doses, and getting sick. I couldn't watch my brother die. I just couldn't. Ms. Martinez pulled out some documents. We have records confirming everything: the medical bills, the job loss, the domestic violence reports, her attempts to give assistance. Sarah has no prior record, not even a parking ticket. Judge Stevens looked at the papers, but he didn't really need to. You could see the truth in Sarah's eyes, in the proud way she held herself despite everything. This wasn't a criminal looking for an easy score. This was a woman who had sacrificed everything trying to keep her family alive. The food items in your bag, Michael said softly. They were all things Mom used to make for us after school. Sarah nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing her face. Peanut butter sandwiches and soup. Some things don't change. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the conference room floor. Through the window, they could see news vans still arriving, drawn by the story of the judge and the defendant who shared a childhood. But they didn't know the real story yet, the story of a bright young girl whose dreams of becoming a doctor had been sacrificed on the altar of family responsibility and systemic failure. Judge Stevens straightened in his chair. The truth was out now, but the bigger question remained. What would justice look like in a case like this? The next morning, courtroom 302 was packed. News of the unusual case had spread, drawing reporters, legal observers, and community members. Judge Stevens sat at his bench, looking out at the crowded room. Sarah stood at the defendant's table, her daughter Jasmine and brother James in the front row behind her. But there were new faces, too. The director of Liberty City Community Center was there, along with representatives from 3 local hospitals. The dean of Miami State's medical school sat near the back, and beside him was the CEO of Thompson Healthcare, one of the city's largest medical companies. Judge Stevens cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. Before I announce my decision in the case of State versus Thompson, I want to share something with this court. He paused, making eye contact with different people in the room. Yesterday, I spent 5 hours on the phone. I spoke with healthcare providers, community leaders, educational institutions, and business owners. I asked them all the same question. What if we stopped seeing cases like this as crimes to be punished and started seeing them as community failures to be fixed? Mr. Rodriguez, the prosecutor, shifted in his seat. This was definitely not a typical court proceeding, but he had agreed to support the judge's plan, and he kept his silence. Ms. Thompson's case has revealed gaps in our system, Michael continued. Gaps that force good people to make desperate choices. Today, we're going to try something new. He pulled out a document and began to read. Instead of jail time, I am creating a pilot program called the Second Chance Initiative. Miss Thompson will be the first participant, but not the last. Sarah stood straighter, her eyes fixed on the judge. Michael outlined the program's details. First, Thompson Healthcare has agreed to provide immediate medical assistance. They will cover James Thompson's insulin and medical supplies for 1 year, while helping the family navigate long-term healthcare options. James wiped tears from his eyes as his sister reached back to squeeze his hand. Second, the Liberty City Community Center is creating a new job training program. They need someone to coordinate their health education services. Ms. Thompson, with her experience in healthcare and her deep understanding of community needs, will fill this position. The community center director nodded approvingly. The salary would be modest but stable. Third, Miami State Medical School has offered to review Ms. Thompson's old college credits. They have a new program for non-traditional students pursuing healthcare careers. If Ms. Thompson wishes, she can complete her education while working. Jasmine beamed at her mother, who stood shocked, barely breathing. Fourth, this court will establish a monthly review system. Ms. Thompson will meet with a court-appointed counselor and provide updates on her progress. This isn't just about avoiding punishment. It's about creating real, lasting change. Judge Stevens turned to address Sarah directly. You'll also complete 100 hours of community service, sharing your story with others who might be facing similar challenges. Your experience could help prevent someone else from reaching this point of desperation. He looked around the courtroom. This program isn't just for Ms. Thompson. Moving forward, similar cases will be evaluated for inclusion in the Second Chance Initiative. We're creating a network of support that includes healthcare providers, educational institutions, employers, and community organizations. The room buzzed with excitement. Reporters were scribbling frantically in their notebooks. Several people were wiping tears from their eyes. Miss Thompson, Judge Stevens said, his voice softer now, 30 years ago, you helped a struggling student believe in himself. You showed me that with the right support, anyone can succeed. Today, this court is going to return that favor. He raised his gavel. In light of the circumstances, and with the defendant's agreement to participate in the Second Chance Initiative, I am suspending all charges. This case is dismissed. The gavel struck with a crack that seemed to echo through the courtroom. Sarah covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with relief. Jasmine and James hugged each other, crying openly now. As the room erupted in applause, Judge Stevens watched his old friend being embraced by her family. Sometimes, he realized, the most powerful form of justice wasn't about punishment at all. It was about giving people the tools they needed to rebuild their lives. The Second Chance Initiative was just beginning, but in that moment, watching Sarah Thompson smile through her tears, Judge Michael Stevens knew it would work. Because sometimes all people needed was exactly what its name promised: a second chance. The story of Judge Stevens and Sarah Thompson spread like wildfire. Within days, major news networks picked up the story, and reporters from across the country descended on Miami. The courthouse steps became a meeting point for people wanting to share their own stories of struggling with medical debt and poverty. 1 month after the historic decision, Judge Stevens sat in his office, reviewing the stack of newspapers on his desk. The headlines told the story. Miami judge transforms criminal justice with Second Chance program. Childhood friends reunite in court, change lives. Healthcare crisis leads to innovative court solution. But it wasn't just news coverage that was making waves. Real change was happening in the community. Dr. Maria Rodriguez, head of Miami General Hospital, had started a new program called Healthcare Heroes. The program helped former healthcare workers who had lost their jobs get back into the medical field. Sarah Thompson's story opened our eyes. Dr. Rodriguez told reporters, "We were losing talented, caring people simply because they couldn't afford to stay in healthcare." The Liberty City Community Center, where Sarah and Michael had played basketball as children, was now running at full capacity. They had turned their old storage room into a medical training classroom, where Sarah taught basic healthcare skills 3 evenings a week. Her students included single mothers, retired seniors, and young people looking for a career path. James, Sarah's brother, had become an unexpected spokesman for diabetes awareness. From his wheelchair, he spoke at community meetings about the importance of affordable insulin and proper medical care. His story had caught the attention of state lawmakers, who were now discussing bills to cap insulin prices. Jasmine, Sarah's daughter, had started a student group at her high school called Future Healers. They organized health fairs and collected supplies for families in need. "My mom inspired me," she told the school newspaper. "I want to be a doctor, just like she wanted to be." Other judges from across the country began calling Judge Stevens, asking about the Second Chance Initiative. How did it work? Could they start similar programs? Michael spent his lunch breaks sharing the program details and helping other courts set up their own versions. But not everyone supported the changes. Some critics argued that the program was too soft on crime. "What kind of message are we sending?" wrote one angry columnist. "That you can break the law if you have a sad story." Judge Stevens addressed these concerns at a National Justice Reform Conference. "We're not ignoring the law," he explained to the packed auditorium. "We're fixing the problems that lead people to break it. It's cheaper to help someone get back on their feet than to keep them in prison." The numbers supported his argument. In the first month alone, the program had helped 15 first-time offenders avoid jail time, saved the city $180,000 in prison costs, connected 30 families with proper medical care, created 12 new jobs in community health services, reduced repeat offenses in similar cases to 0. Sarah's success played a big part in proving the program worked. She hadn't missed a single day at her new job. Her healthcare classes were always full, and she was taking night courses to finish her medical degree. Most importantly, her brother James was getting proper medical care, and her daughter Jasmine was thriving in school. Local businesses started getting involved too. Thompson Healthcare's support inspired other companies to join the initiative. A local pharmacy chain started a medication assistance program. A medical supplies company donated wheelchairs and equipment. Even small businesses offered job training and employment opportunities. The Liberty City neighborhood, where it all began, was changing. The old basketball court where Sarah and Michael used to play was renovated. Now it hosted community health fairs on weekends, with doctors offering free checkups and advice. 6 weeks after the court decision, Judge Stevens drove past Wilson's Pharmacy, where Sarah had been arrested. The store had put up a new sign. Proud partner of the Second Chance Initiative. No one should go without medicine. He smiled, remembering something Sarah had written in his 6th grade yearbook. Sometimes the best things start with someone being brave enough to care. 3 decades later, those words were still true. One act of understanding had started a wave of change that was transforming their community, one second chance at a time. 2 years had passed since that fateful day in courtroom 302. On a bright Miami morning, Judge Michael Stevens stood at the podium in the newly renovated Liberty City Community Center. The room was filled with over 200 people, including program graduates, their families, community leaders, and reporters. This was the Second Chance Initiative's 2nd anniversary celebration, but it was also something more. Today, Sarah Thompson would graduate from Miami State Medical School's special program, finally achieving the dream she had put on hold 20 years ago. When we started this program, Judge Stevens began, people said it wouldn't work. They said we were being too soft, too optimistic. He paused, looking out at the faces before him. But today, I'm proud to share our results. The large screen behind him displayed the program's achievements. 200 participants successfully completed the program. 0 repeat offenses among graduates. $2 million saved in prison costs. 150 new jobs created in healthcare and community services. 500 families connected with proper medical care. 15 other cities had adopted similar programs. But numbers didn't tell the whole story. In the front row sat James Thompson, no longer in a wheelchair. The medical care he received through the program had helped him regain partial use of his legs. Next to him was Jasmine, now a pre-med student at Miami State, following in her mother's footsteps. Sarah sat on the stage, wearing her graduation cap and gown. At 46, she was older than most of her classmates, but her smile was as bright as any 20-year-old's. She had completed her degree while working full-time at the community center, teaching healthcare classes and coordinating the very program that had given her a second chance. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Stevens announced, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. 2 years ago, she stood in my courtroom facing charges. Today, she stands before you as a graduate of medical school and the director of our community health program. Please welcome Dr. Sarah Thompson. The room erupted in applause as Sarah approached the podium. She hugged Michael quickly before taking his place. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but her voice was strong and clear. When I was 12 years old, she began, I used to tell my friend Mikey that I wanted to be a doctor. Life took me on a different path, and for a while, I thought that dream was lost forever. She looked at Judge Stevens. But sometimes our biggest setbacks can lead to our greatest comebacks. Sarah shared how the program had not only helped her family, but it created a ripple effect throughout the community. The healthcare training classes she started had grown into a full medical assistant certification program. Many of her former students now worked in local clinics and hospitals. The pharmacy where she had once been arrested was now a partner in the program, offering discounted medications to families in need. The owner had even created a scholarship fund for students pursuing healthcare careers. But the most important change, Sarah continued, isn't in the buildings or programs. It's in how we see each other. We've learned that justice doesn't always wear a black robe. Sometimes it wears a helping hand, a second chance, a belief in someone's potential. As she spoke, Judge Stevens thought about how far they'd come from their days playing basketball in Liberty City. They had both achieved their childhood dreams, just by different paths than they'd expected, and now they were helping others achieve theirs. After the ceremony, as people mingled and celebrated, Michael found Sarah talking with a group of new program participants. She was wearing her white doctor's coat over her graduation gown, the name, Dr. Sarah Thompson, freshly embroidered on the pocket. "Ready for your first day at the clinic tomorrow, Dr. Thompson?" he asked, grinning. Sarah smiled back, her eyes shining. "Ready as I'll ever be, Your Honor." They both looked around the community center, at the walls now covered with photos of program graduates, at the busy medical training classrooms, at the families celebrating new beginnings. "We did it, Mikey," Sarah said softly. "We really did it." Judge Stevens nodded. Their childhood friendship had come full circle, transforming not just their lives but their entire community. The Second Chance Initiative had become more than a program. It was proof that with understanding, support, and opportunity, people could rewrite their stories. And somewhere, in another courtroom, another judge was looking at a defendant and thinking not about punishment, but about potential. The ripple effect continued, one second chance at a time.